Dave. Yes, the microphone is on. That's a great start. First of all, thank you for having me these last couple of days. It's been a really great event, and really great to speak to so many of you who've been here. I'm going to talk about, as on the screen, I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation, talk a bit about Johnny Walker, and talk a bit about the F word. Really probably going to sort of frame all of this just within sort of like my time with Diageo, and sort of like a bit about my career and about how I've kind of been involved in all of these things as I've worked with the company. I joined Diageo 2007, and it was straight from university. I was doing a PhD. I really needed a job because I was living in Glasgow and I didn't have any money. So I applied for lots of jobs, doing pretty much anything that anyone would take me to do. I kept on getting told I was overqualified because I had a PhD, and I would lose interest in all of the roles that were being offered because I was obviously a deep thinker and an academic, and I was really trying to convince people that I would genuinely do anything. I will come and work for you, and I will work very hard. I just really need a job. So I took an interview with Diageo. I was very fortunate to get a position. It's probably a little bit revealing that I used that phrase, but I started working in the analytical labs, and it was really great to see some analytical chemistry being flagged by Jota and by Ian and Don, getting into a bit more of the chemistry. I say I went to work in an analytical lab. I wasn't really an analytical chemist. My PhD was in physical chemistry, which is light and semiconductors and interesting things like that. So when I went to work in the analytical lab, I didn't really know what I was doing, to be fair. And they were very kind to me. They kind of recognised that I really wanted to be there, and I was really interested, and I had a sort of certain type of mindset, which was to challenge pretty much everything, look at things in different ways, and that was in a time when the company were trying to recruit people, specifically scientists, who would take on some challenges and do things differently. So I found myself working in the analytical labs, and I kind of deconstructed every process and reworked out how most things were done. And all the while I was in that space, I started to become aware of something which was called the Whisky Specialist Team, which sounded amazing. And I really wanted to be part of that. And the more opportunities I got, the more whisky samples I was able to nose and taste and work with this Whisky Specialist Team. I very quickly realised that's what I wanted to do. So over the course of a few months, I agitated and nagged and spoke to anyone who would listen, and bored people at Christmas parties, suggesting about how great it would be if I got a chance to work in whisky specialism. And throughout that period, was really kind of trying to make that happen. So when people ask me how you get into being a whisky blender or a whisky specialist, there's lots of things that could say. It could be about sort of resilience and about never giving up. But I think that the one thing that tipped the balance in my favour was my ability to build bridges out of spaghetti and blue tack. After a few months working for Diageo, there was a team building session with everyone who worked in the science and technology area, and one of the team building tasks was to make a bridge out of, thankfully not cooked spaghetti, raw spaghetti, and blue tack. And me being a very visual person, a very hands-on person, a very sort of three-dimensional person, that was just right up my street, and I was absolutely loving this. And on my team was Jim Beveridge, Dr. Beveridge, the master blender for Johnny Walker. And he liked the way I built bridges. So, this is my truth and how this happens. This is how I see it happening. There was probably some other sort of profiling going on in the background, but my bridges got me into that blending team. Within a few months of working with Diageo, I was working in the blending team, and really great opportunity. And I suppose what do blenders do is probably a big question, because it's quite tangible to talk about what distillers do. And it's within the industry, it's quite tangible to talk about what a cooper does. They make barrels, and it's quite simple. But blenders is maybe a little bit more one of those sort of like intangible things. And throughout my time working with Johnny Walker on blends, I've spent a lot of time looking at the history of blending, and then how kind of like which is effectively, and I'm sure Dave would say similar, is the history of Scotch whisky, and how Scotch whisky's become what it is now. And to me, the oldest model of blending and the modern model of blending have so many similarities. The blenders would sit in some way at the centre of everything that's happening within the company, because they are overseeing the inventory of stock which is there. They're overseeing what's coming out of that stock and going to be blended, to be put together, to go into the bottles. They are looking at the quality throughout all of this maturation time, this inventory as it sits. But they're also being influential in what's going into the casks, what type of casks are being filled, and what kind of distillate is being produced. And back to the early days of Walker and production of blends, that would have been a choice of which distilleries they buy from, and what kind of barrels they're, and what kind of like literally hands-on blending was going on. But in a more modern context, the blender will inform all of the other decisions around about the processes. They'll set challenges to the guys in the distilleries and say, we would like you to take this flavour and intensify it. We would like you to take this kind of profile and refine it in a certain way. And I always spent a lot of the time in the blending team working with the maturation side. I'm working with the cooperage that we have at the time at Carsbridge, and then following up we have the cooperage at Canvas, and laying down lots of experiments and doing lots of different things, really primarily focusing on flavour. I'm going to first picture, because this I feel like a bit like David Attenborough here. This is the blender in their natural habitat. Because really the nosing and to a lesser extent, but similarly significant, the tasting and the understanding of flavours is probably what you would say is the unique selling point of a blender, and about what you're really trying to understand the flavours, and you're trying to you're working to sort of like a few different, sometimes competing factors in your own minds. Blenders are looking to make consistency. Historically, in the days of buying ad hoc barrels wherever was possible in the 1800s, that was probably best summarised as being trying to make order from chaos. There's all different flavours and different profiles available everywhere, and yet Johnny Walker in his grocer's shop wants to supply the same flavour that he supplied the week before, or the month before, or 6 months before. So making order from chaos. It's not quite chaos nowadays. A lot more control, a lot more automation, a lot more understanding and science behind it. But there's still that movement to keep consistency and to basically to understand how to control all of your different processes to make your flavours exactly what you want them to be, the best they can be, but also but without kind of peaks and troughs and variation in there, which is one of the things that goes on behind the scenes, and all the innovation that goes on behind the scenes that we probably never really speak about. The efforts that go into making consistency. It's being consistent is difficult. I'm sure some of the people in the room will have found that and either embraced that or been concerned at sleepless nights about that. The other real kind of job of a blender is the innovation part, and whether that be thinking about flavour in new ways or different ways, working on new blends, changing blends, and certainly the working innovation was something that some of the kind of like the highlights of my time working on whisky already was some of the bottles that are on the slide just here. I mean, it might sound a bit strange, but generally when people that I've worked with have gone into work in blending, they've tended to start on the very small batch, which almost by definition usually ends up being very high-end products with a lot of supervision. because you've got that kind of like instant feedback of you've mixed 20 cask samples, and that's not quite right, let's do another version of that, let's do another version of that, let's do another. So it's a great way to learn about combining flavours, combining distillates, combining spirits, and looking at maturation. As the years went by, I worked in more innovation products, worked in more sort of like new blends. I was let off the leash a little bit and had lots of great ideas, which all failed miserably. But one of the sort of like the first sort of big innovation projects that I worked on, which was a really fascinating area to work in, was Johnny Walker Double Black. So Johnny Walker Double Black was devised by a couple of colleagues in the blending team, and then I was sort of like tasked with doing almost like a kind of like a 5 or a 10-year plan. So it's like, how are we going to do this forever, and how are we going to keep this flavour profile, which generally involves ordering loads and loads of cask samples of loads and loads of different ages, and doing a bit of a survey and looking at maturing stocks and looking at ages. And Double Black's just been a really great success, and people have really loved it, really appreciated it over the years. It's something very interesting to work with in terms of a profile. Very smoky whiskies, but with lots of richness and sweetness from the barrel aging as well. Having worked in Double Black quite extensively, I kind of got the nod to start working on Black Label, which is, so you can think about it a few different ways, but the way I always think about it is it's kind of crown jewels territory for a blending house like Johnny Walker. It's kind of, it's the flagship, it's the big one, it's out there, there's a lot of responsibility in there. And worked on Johnny Walker recipe creation and sort of consistent work behind that with Black Label over a number of years, which again was, it's the sort of like, it's fascinating, super interesting, but it's something that doesn't necessarily get talked about, about how you make consistently Black Label on the scale we make it, with the kind of variations in supply over the years. Next to Black Label is I'll call it an anomaly in my career of something to work with. So we've talked a lot about age and what's the best age and what's the peak of maturation, and what I love about sort of like rules, and if you say them in a harsh voice, they're dogma, but what I love about rules is that there's always exceptions, and I was very fortunate to be involved in creating a 60-year-old blended whiskey, so working with malts and grains that were all over 60 years old, which were all incredibly light and fragranced and delicate, and none of them had been kind of afflicted by what you would call over-maturation or too much wood or too much astringency. It was just an incredible selection of whiskies to work with, and the additions that were created from that were sold for over £100,000 each, with a lot of that money going to charity. It was part of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee celebrations a number of years ago, and through the Royal Warrant, we donated a lot of money to charity through creating these editions and selling them. After that, I don't know if that's kind of like, this is like the Mount Fuji shape, you've kind of got like a kind of a peak of doing something very sort of like exquisite and old and very sort of limited edition. We made 60 of these, 60 bottles. I was asked to take a look at single malt innovation, because the Whisky Specialist team, although everyone specialises in different areas and work together on a lot of things, that also includes making single malts and choosing the way that single malts are put together and choosing how we do innovation. So I was asked to look at innovation in single malts, and over the course of just over 2 years, spent a lot of time working with Dufton, looking at different cask types, different aging profiles, different ages, and looking about sort of like what sort of push and pull of maturation will do to that over the years, and how you can concentrate different flavours, how you can remove different flavours with time. A lot of the work I was doing in this period was really looking at that maturation, about how those flavours are being affected by time, and trying to kind of understand that, and lots of lots of sort of research and trials and experimentation in the background. But at the end of that period, I was asked if I would take that kind of maturation research role and lead a team specifically looking into that piece. So this is about 2014. I was asked to kind of to take on this maturation research team, which at the time was a team of 2, including myself, which I'm still calling a team, but there was 2 of us. But what we were basically, we'd moved from being in the blending team to being sort of like almost like the blending team were customers of ours. They were setting us challenges, go out and tell us how we can do this differently, or tell us how we can make this flavour. We would like this specific flavour, which we feel comes in these whiskies. How do you get that all the time rather than some of the time? So big challenges, and also getting down to the cooperage at Canvas and working with the coopers there a lot. I'm not a cooper. I'm not built like a cooper, you might have noticed. So when I started working with the coopers, I was very wary to be very humble of their talent set and not try and stand on their toes because they'd hit me with a hammer. But once you kind of like got them on side, there was so much interest in changing things and doing things differently, and them using their experience. We had a few years doing that, and some of the experiments we were able to set up, and even just some of the anecdotal things that the coopers were able to tell us, saying, oh well, actually, I remember someone saying back in the day, oh, the guy who trained me, his brother used to say that this happened. I was like, oh, well, that's really interesting. I've read that somewhere else. So taking on board all of this experience and trying to use that to problem solve some of the tasks that were coming from the blending team. So I've put up the lovely flavour wheel because I love a pictorial flavour wheel because I'm very sort of visual with the way I think about things. But I really like this one because it's obviously pictures, but it's got all of these flavours, and you might not be able to see it too well, but you'd probably argue that at least half of those are either wood derived or wood refined, if that makes sense. So they're either flavours coming from the wood or flavours that you would say come across the way they do in the final product because of the influence of the woods in there, which probably argue that all of them come through the maturation process, but directly you'd say, kind of the top half is all your kind of like your wood flavours. Two things I'll briefly mention is within maturation research we were looking at putting liquid in a barrel and trying to keep it there, and different ways of doing that. And much as Ian said, I'm not going to tell you how we did it, but again, working with the coopers, really interesting pieces of work and using all their experience and being quite kind of creative with engineering and the science behind it. This piece here is, I'm not really going to go into too much depth, but when we moved our coopering operations from Carsbridge to the new cooperage at Canvas, which is the lovely picture here, which was about 2010. We have this process, which is recharring, rejuvenation, regeneration, which has been done in the industry for a fair while, since the 80s probably. And the idea is that you've used your barrel over and over again, it's not doing anything anymore. There's not really any flavour left to extract, it's not doing anything to the spirit. So we'll take that barrel, we'll strip away the inner surface, we'll rechar, retoast the inner surface, and then we can use that barrel again. And I think it was Don mentioned, it might be Ian, that you don't necessarily get exactly the same profile back again of flavour, but you get vastly increased flavour of what you would get from the barrel that was just exhausting away. In the move from Carsbridge to Canvas, we were able to put in place a number of process changes, and they were many of them were about the kind of the ergonomics and the health and safety side of coopering, and basically taking out the wear and tear and the mean hard physical labour of being a cooper, so they can focus on the actual kind of like the fine skills of coopering. But other changes were about the kind of the quality processes. So in changing the shaving and changing the firing regime, we were able to increase the potential flavour within these rejuvenated barrels by about 80%, which is a huge increase, and from a blending point of view gives loads more opportunities to do different things, and to do innovation, and to look at things in different ways, and controlling the char as well really gives lots and lots of opportunities to think about how you're maturing your spirit, and what that char is taking away, and what that char is catalysing within the reactions within the barrel. One of the reasons this is really close to the work that I've done is that Johnny Walker Double Black was actually an example of how we used a lot of the rejuvenated barrels in different ways, deployed tactically within the malts and the grains that go into Double Black to create that specific flavour profile. So it's really something that we probably wouldn't have been able to make the way we make it and reach that profile without the technical innovation of that rejuvenation process. And that improved rejuvenation process again has made us able to do that in a much more consistent in a different way. So I was running maturation research for 3 years and having a lot of fun. But maturation takes a long time, and you lay down a lot of trials, and then you lay down some more trials, and then you start looking at the trials you originally laid down. And I was probably reviewing trials that I'd set down when I was a few years into the blending team. I got a call from a couple of colleagues who I'd worked with over the years who had said that they were working in the Diageo Futures team, and would I be interested in maybe coming to work with them for a while, because it sounded kind of fun, and they were quite keen to take my approach to innovation and my background in blending on the brand side as well. And I said yes, because that's the rule I learned through leaving university and going to join a company, is you just say yes to stuff and then you worry about what that means later on. So it turns out Diageo Futures is in the marketing side of the business, which I don't think I realised at first. So at the moment I'm working in this future innovation space in the demand side of the business, which is fascinating, very different. Very different in that I don't have to tuck my shirt in and I can wear trainers to work, which is great. But being able to see lots of different aspects of the way Diageo works and the things that Diageo do. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about any of these areas in particular, but one of the things that Diageo Futures do is they run the Diageo side of the partnership with Distill Ventures. So Distill Ventures being an independently run but solely funded by Diageo Ventures program that looks at new producers, founders, entrepreneurs, and will help with some funding, help with advice on production and anything else that people are interested in. So with Distill Ventures, probably at the moment between 15 and 20 investments ongoing. One of the deals with Distill Ventures is that you don't necessarily have to talk about the Diageo investment. So at the moment there's only 4 of the investments that are publicly acknowledged as being Diageo funded. So there's Stouning Whisky in Denmark, the Seedlip, the non-alcoholic distilled gin. There's Starward, which has disappeared. It's there, it's just very like that. It's Starward Australian Whisky. And Belsazar, which is a German vermouth company, which is actually the first one of the Distill Venture investments which has moved into the Diageo core business. It's been fully acquisitioned. What's the word? Fully acquired. So it's now become part of Diageo. So I suppose it's in terms of disruption and future, it's probably just a way that some companies are looking at the future and looking at the future landscape and seeing how they can be involved in that, help with that, but maybe not get left behind in any way. The other thing that Futures has done while I've been in the team is actually, so Distill Ventures is looking out with the company and looking at what other people are doing. I also ran a scheme which was about entrepreneurship and actually just challenging the whole company. you've got good ideas, tell us what your ideas are, and if we like them, we'll give you some support, we'll help you create a pitch. You can pitch to, you know, exec level members of the company. If we like that, you know, we'll take you out of your job, we'll pay you, and we'll let you run this, you know, this part of your idea. And that was in November, all kicked off. Had loads and loads of entries, loads of great ideas. And then the pitching sessions were across the new year. And now we're just at the stage where there's, you know, the final three, whether the investments in different places are going to go. So again, just a different way of looking at, you know, approach to the future. So the rest of my time in Futures. So this is one of the reasons that I went to Futures, to work specifically on this project, and it was the idea, the big kind of like blue sky thought was it's sort of personalisable Johnny Walker, and what does that look like? So over the course of a number of months, probably started sort of Easter, prior to Easter 2017, and that's when my kind of like involvement started, and then I joined the team full time in October. And working with a colleague in Futures, we've kind of like run this almost like a startup. You know, we've done this, you know, as much as possible in an entrepreneurial way, trying to make this Johnny Walker proposition come to life. The idea is that it's a platform. You go onto an online experience. You talk about your preferences in terms of food and flavour. You answer a series of fairly simple questions, and the algorithm, the flavour engine, suggests one of a range of 6 new blended whiskies, which will be closest to your preference, to your tastes, and then you can go on and personalise the label, and you can write messages on the label, and then it just gets sent out to you. So it's quite a simple idea. Not simple to do, but really, you know, really interesting, and again, just looking at things in a slightly different way and doing something with a very traditional, a very kind of a great heritage of a brand like Johnny Walker, and looking in a different way. So I was able to sit down with the blending team, former colleagues from a different point of view, which was nice. I was on the other side of the table to talk about, you know, what kind of whiskies would we do for this? Is it what was possible? How do you look at Johnny Walker and stretch the flavour profile in all these different directions? And how do you get enough breadth of flavour in there that you could actually say that it's going to be something which will appeal to anyone, or to anyone who likes Scotch, or to anyone who likes whiskey in general? And went on a fairly blank sheet of paper, and the ideas were kind of like spread back and forward, and trying lots of different styles and different types. Kind of landed on six variants. Ranging from sort of very smoky to very light, and everything in between. And then started talking about, well, how are we gonna explain these flavour profiles? So looking at these flavour wheels, which again, I'm a very visual person, so this is something that I was really keen to kind of like work on. Was saying, how do you express sometimes quite difficult concepts, but through quite simple pictures. So richness, it's actually honeycombs in the picture there. We're not saying it tastes honey, or it's honeyed, but it's just trying to give that sense of what kind of like style is there. So yes, yeah, so six new whiskies across this range, and then we took them, we profiled them. We took them to a couple of different types of panels, like an internal expert panel and then an external kind of like a consumer panel. And then started to work with a company called Vivander, who really interesting kind of company who do a lot of preference testing and profiling, and their sort of stock in trade has been sort of flavour profiling from a food point of view, and they'd never really worked in beverages, but they had loads of information. They have 15 million profiles of people who've entered their sort of preferences and their, you know, what sorts of flavours they like. And they have 7 million active users who use their site regularly to make decisions about shopping and flavour. And we sort of challenged them and said, look, we've got whiskey. Can you overlay those sorts of preference testing with whiskey? And they went away and they had a shot, and we employed a brilliant statistician who never understood a word he said. It was very compelling. And we came up with a flavour algorithm, which I won't go through in loads of detail, but effectively we chose 16 sort of like key flavours, which Probably can't see them, but sort of mango, dark chocolate, black olives, not standard whiskey language. And the idea was to try and give people foods that they could immediately recognise that, oh, I like that, or I'm not keen on that. And the idea is you pick 5 of them. So purposefully not going down the kind of the traditional sort of Scotch whisky kind of flavour routes, like rich fruit and coconut, things like that. And behind the scenes, there's this algorithm that takes those choices, takes the second piece which is in the middle. Again, not come across brilliantly, but it's just 3 sliders which are about sort of intensity of flavour. So there's spice, kind of like like a chili spice. In the middle, there's the intensity that you would take in coffee, and on the end, there's the house season, so how salty the food you take, and all of that kind of comes together to give them one of the 6 blends. There's the flavour wheel comes up with some tasting notes and some suggestions of like the sort of flavours. A little bit more information, the sort of distilleries that we've used in creating it, some facts, suggested and then you can personalise the label, engrave a message onto it, and then pay for it, and it gets sent to your house. That's kind of where we are just now. We launched this as a pilot in Great Britain and Spain about 6 weeks ago. Had loads of interest, loads of people using the site, loads of information, loads of feedback about what people are enjoying about it, how people are kind of interacting with it, how people are finding the sort of flavour side of it, the way we talk about flavour, and loads of people buying it. It's been incredibly popular. Demand's been massive. And behind that, we've kind of got this ongoing ambition to sort of like refine the offering, to refine the algorithm, take that feedback, maybe make more blends, stretch the flavours in different directions. So hopefully, a really kind of like great piece of pilot work that we can take on and do other things with. So thank you for your time. That was my version of being innovative and working in a big company and working with a massive brand like Johnny Walker. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Oh my God, that's great. Right, I'm going to throw this open to the floor. We've got a little bit tight for time, but definitely time for questions. Sorry, was that a hand? No, we've got
so obviously you're getting a lot of data out of this project. Was that really was that the idea behind doing it, was to try and capture customer data? Or was it really because you thought that personalization was really what you were looking for?
I mean, so the personalisation bit was probably the kernel of the idea to start with, but sort of like the real-time feedback of how people are interacting with something, like interacting with flavour like that, and then when you match someone to a blend, and then you ask them, did you like it? Did it match your expectations? What did you think? Did it make you think about whiskey differently? Did it make you think about Johnny Walker differently? So the data side is fascinating and really valuable and really great insights. And I've been kind of like going back and talking to the blending team about the sort of thing we're seeing, the sort of even language points that are sort of like driving people to make decisions about what they want when it comes to the whiskey, which we've probably never really had that immediate feedback. It's mostly been anecdotal, conversational, ambassadors speaking to people who are doing tastings. So I think it's become much more kind of front and centre of the sort of thing we're thinking about.
I think the data could actually be more valuable.
Yeah, I think you're right, yeah.
how far can you stretch it before it stops being Johnny Walker?
I think that's a really great question. It's quite a philosophical question, and we're not in a bar, so you're not allowed to discuss philosophy. I think
you can get a drink if you want.
No, I think there's a very sort of traditional idea of what Johnny Walker whiskies should be like, but I think there is definitely scope to stretch that and take it in different directions. I think there's a DNA in the way that these blends are put together and the way these blends are made and the flavour profiles that come from them that I think I think puts it into that sphere of Johnny Walker. And Johnny Walker's always been very innovative over the years. I think there's definitely scope to push things a bit further. One of the interesting things on this sort of looking at how these whiskies fit in terms of a sort of like mapping them for doing the preference testing was they were all not necessarily just clustered together. If you looked at how they sat alongside wild whiskies, Irish whiskies and other Scotch whiskies, we weren't thrown across the whole map. It was really they were still of a type within their own kind of area.
Is this a way of kind of changing the mindset about blends, which it's been one of the great conundrums, I think, over the past decade, if not more, that people just don't understand blends, and, that paradigm of malt's good, blends bad. Is this one way of changing mindset?
I think it can be. I think if you can get flavour to the start of the conversation, and you're not necessarily starting a conversation about heritage, you don't have to tell someone a story before you actually tell them why the glass you're presenting to them is good. If you can get flavour at the start of that story, then I think you're in a good place. And I think that going about these blends in that way, and some of the other innovation that Johnny Walker have been doing again is about really kind of like looking at that flavour and what you can do in that space. So yeah, I think it's definitely a good route to be taking.
Any other questions from the floor here about blended Scotch in general? Johnny Walker, innovation? Yeah.
I would be interested if you could actually go back one slide, and it would help with my question. Yes, right. Top left-hand corner. Those are the flavours that you have selected, I presume, for the ease of communication between yourself and the consumer. So if that's the case, what was the logic behind those flavours? Because as you said, they are not the traditional whiskey wheel flavours.
Yeah, this was actually, it was very much a two-way discussion between us and Evander, who were doing that kind of like modelling piece and the preference piece. They have a product which is called Flavour Print, and it asks over 30 questions about preference, yes, no, do you like this? And they're all this style of food. So we asked them to whittle that down to ones that they thought would actually really drive people towards one flavour style within those whiskies. And these are the ones that they came back with, and we kind of looked at them and we subbed a few of them out because we thought they were a little bit too obscure or they wouldn't make any sense in either the UK or in Spain. So this was kind of where we got to as being what we felt were a group of flavours that people would look at and say yes or no in a kind of like in a sort of strong response.
It's a bit like when we had in the pub, where you've got 4 flavours?
Six.
Six.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a little bit like that.
Yeah, although the 6 flavours we use in Black Rock are much more traditional whiskey flavours.
But these are not.
No, but the flavour wheels which we created with the blending team, they were much more of that kind of the floral, the richness, the smoke, the fruit, spiciness. These the sort of like the way to pictorially describe how these whiskies come across in different profiles, closer to the kind of traditional whiskey language.
Is this a kind of demystification project as much as anything? I mean, and also, this was the second question, maybe sort of coming on as bad as Wisniewski there. Picking up from something Brian said earlier, when we were talking about Brian, about the role that Walker plays in category building and changing, and again, maybe changing mindset and demystifying blends to get people to understand what you and the blending team do.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's certainly. I wouldn't argue that the whole proposition really necessarily suits someone who's already a lover of Johnny Walker, for example. I think they would enjoy it, and I think they would enjoy the fact that you can make a bottle that's got whatever you want on the label and the personalising part. But someone who maybe doesn't necessarily see a route into understanding blended whiskey, they might see this, they might say, well, my flavour preferences are difficult to articulate, but I chose the flavours in here. I kind of rated it in this way, and it suggested this blend. They sent it to me. I tried it, and I liked it. So I now know that there's a Johnny Walker whiskey profile which I like, which is this one. So yeah, I think there is that possibility of bringing people into trying blended whiskies that they might not necessarily have had otherwise.
One last question.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. It's really, you've obviously got that working pretty well. So the data coming back, do you have any idea if there's anybody picking a particular preference? So have you got sort of 70% of like one particular flavour profile?
It's been quite broadly selected across the 6 blends. What we have found, one really interesting phenomenon, I don't even know if I'm probably supposed to tell you this, but okay, it's fine. What we found is that most people were landing on a blend and taking that blend and saying that this is the blend for me. We did give people the option of changing. So when you land on the flavour profile, which is up here on the top right, at the bottom of that screen it says, would you like to explore other flavours? So you can click through to the other flavour profiles. What we've found, the behaviour that we found is that when people do click through and start exploring the other flavour profiles, they almost always end up on the smokiest one. So it's almost like, oh, interesting, more. What's that? Oh, and I click more, and what do I get? And it's like you go up and you get as smoky as possible, and they're like, yeah, I'll have that. So people have been sort of like funneling themselves into smoky whiskies, which from Johnny Walker traditions, kind of makes sense. And it's probably if I'd written down my predictions, put them in an envelope, and posted it to myself 6 months ago, I probably would have argued that the smoky one would do very well, especially in Britain. But it didn't, because I can pretend I did.
Well, excellent, Matthew. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.